A historic structure is not more expensive if you accept the fact that you're working with a historic structure. If you don't ask it to do more than it was originally designed to do, it's very, very normal pricing to a remodel. If you ask it to outperform or be designed beyond its original standards, it will be extremely expensive because you're trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. I would say cost wise, if you have the right team and you approach it from the beginning with the right attitude and the right acceptance, it's very normal. If you don't have the right team, if you don't have the right attitude and you don't understand how it was originally meant to perform or architecturally meant to be, it's going to be very, very expensive for a very long time.
It's going to stretch the process out
Yeah.
because you're going to encounter new problems
Hmm.
along the way that nobody thought about.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Lawson, and as we say every single time, we teach that each project must have four key components to succeed, which are represented by the simple child's drawing of a house that we're going to pop on the screen for you right here. The foundation is proper planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof, protecting it all, is proper execution. And I'm chuckling because Toner's over here doing the hand motions as I was going through that. He's heard this spiel a few times. And so joining me today on the show are Toner Kersting with Toner Home Matters and Kevin Dahlstrand with Dahlstrand Architecture. And as Toner says, the Kevin Dahlstrand
Yes.
Architecture.
No.
Industry term.
So really happy to have you guys on today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin, everyone knows Toner now. He's been here like a million times. We'll let him say a little blurb here in a second. But Kevin, your first time with us.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit about you and your background and how you got into what you're doing now.
Yeah. I probably should have known I was going to be an architect from a very early age, playing with Legos and any sort of constructible thing from the time I can remember. But it took me a little while to get there. But architecture definitely is where I should have landed and did. I think I knew residential was what I wanted to do early on. Coming out of school, did commercial interiors and worked at a couple of larger firms. But as soon as I could get into residential architecture and the scale of that kind of project, that's what I went after. Worked for some good firms in town. Had a good opportunity to partner up and was a partner in a firm for about 10 years. And then, strangely enough, 7 years ago, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but 7 years ago, I went back out on my own in order to kind of focus a little bit more on contemporary work when I could get it, because the town is changing. And also just to be more kind of flexible. I work for myself, by myself from home. So, can kind of do any size project, big or small, for a client when it comes along. I can be really nimble with that, which is nice. So, grew up in New England, not a original Houstonian, but have been here for 34 years.
Awesome. And Toner, you work with Kevin a lot. And so tell us about kind of how you guys met and what your history is.
Sure. So Kevin was actually one of the first architects that I ever approached. I mean, we're talking 10 or 11, 12 years ago, about when we wanted to move upstream and get before the builder, when we realized that what we did was really a design process, not a construction process. He was very, very open to having that conversation and was one of the first architects where the light kind of went off, like, yeah, this is something that should be there. And then fortunately, when he went on his own, it's sometimes hard to change processes in a large group, but when he went on his own, it's easy to change processes, right?
Yep.
Their processes are your own. He's always been really supportive of that. We have a lot of shared clients, also builder clients, that we're all on board. Most definitely consummate team player. No ego. Kevin's a like ego-free individual, right? But we'll bring into the fact that we need to make decisions for the best of our client. That's not only architectural decisions and construction decisions, but also those are economic from the beginning. There are plenty of architects who will design a project that could never be built for the budget. He's cognizant of that, but not to let it compromise the overall scheme. So been really easy to work with, pleasure to work with. Get to know him personally. I like going on architectural trips when we get to go to different places with Kevin, because he catches on and he sees such a different perspective. He's a good travel buddy. So, yeah, so we really enjoy working with him. and everything we do. And he's also a good referral for us on forensics when people are having struggles, or even when he's getting ready to look at a remodel and he can see that there's performance issues. So he'll get us in there really, really early, even before design is done, so we can try to include those forensic resolutions into the conceptual design.
Awesome. That's a great segue into our topic today. So this episode is about I'm calling it historic renovations, but really I'm talking about older houses, much older houses, and I would say historic is like 100 years old, in that ballpark, and more. That term is a little bit loose. How would you define that historic home?
Well, what is it? The rule for a classic car to be considered a classic, right? To qualify for classic insurance, it's a 50-year vehicle. My next appointment after this is a historic home on a historic registry. It was built in 1985. So it's the newest historic structure on a registry that I've ever participated in. It looks like Miami Vice threw up all over the place. And we have to preserve it, right? And luckily we have a very, very engaged owner who's like, I love this. Everything is pipe, right? Like there's in it, round walls, tons of glass block. Like glass block is king in this space.
Does he like park his white Ferrari Testarossa out in the front, and wear the white jacket and the gold sunglasses?
Yeah. Interesting thing is, it's only the 1985 edition that's on the historic registry. The original house is 1927. So it's a 1927 house on North Boulevard, like legit part of town, right? They never registered that, but it was a renowned architect who did the 85 edition, and it's so particular. And they did a relatively good job of blending the two pieces. It's kind of like a mullet of architecture. It's 1927 in the front, and it's 85 in the back, right? But they blended through the pool, and even the landscape. It had a 1985 landscape design that was still utilized. So that's historic. But then I had a conversation with someone today, and there's something to be said about the 15-year-old house. At the year 15, things start to really, really go south, because 80% of all building materials are not designed to last more than 15 years. And so we're addressing a lot of the issues at year 15 that I had to address at year 100. I think that the older the house, the more important it is to work with professionals to understand those construction methodologies and then how they were modified over time.
Yep. I love the picture of the mullet house, 20s in the front and 80s in the back.
Yeah.
I'm picturing like prohibition in the front and cocaine in the back.
That's right. Cocaine in your Coca-Cola in the front, on mirrors in the back, right? Like the cocaine was still there. It's just how you were consuming it. So
that's as risque as this podcast gets. I'm getting some eye rolls from the background over here. From
Kevin, what do you consider when someone says historic? What are you considering?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and I don't have a clear definition of it. I would think 75, 100 years. I would think that. Excuse me, but the reality is, with building materials now, a 50-year-old house is pretty historic, especially in Houston, where we don't have as many older homes. So, but any renovation, I think, we'll probably discuss, has its challenges, whether old or new.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also, so you're from New England, where old homes are really old.
Yeah,
like,
1800s, 1700s, yeah. Old.
And there's a good chance that if you had your firm where in New England were you again?
We were near Boston.
Near Boston.
Quite, south
you
of
could
Boston.
be working with a homeowner who's already lived in an older structure.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's likely they have never lived in a structure, that old. So they have some relative experience in their expectation, because we have our clients who have not really lived in an old structure. They believe that performance criteria or the architectural criteria is really not much different than new, and that it couldn't be farther apart.
So actual houses that are on the historic registry, or if they're in a historic district. So here in Houston, we have several historic districts. If the house is within that district, then if you renovate it, you have to submit those plans of what you're going to do to the house to the historic commission. It has to get approved, and then there's some limitations on what you can do. Like on some of them, you have to keep the original windows or the original siding or things like that. So there's some considerations that come into play for design and execution and building performance on those houses that are unique. Because again, like with windows, if we're trying to make an energy efficient house, but we've got 20 single glazed windows on the front of that house. That's a major consideration, right?
Yeah, for sure. We actually worked on a project together, Toner and I, some years back with Steven Deitzer, where we were just renovating the kitchen area, a very small portion of a 1930s home, and taking the walls, the interior walls down, and there was basically shredded up newspaper in the
Yeah.
bottom of the studs, and no insulation other than that inside the wall. It was brick exterior, but the first inclination from my standpoint was, well, we got to go back with all new stuff, insulate, da 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 da, do all the things you'd expect to do, insulated windows. Luckily, Toner was on the project and did the calculations and did the math and whatever, and kind of explained to us, you're potentially going to throw the house out of balance because you have one super tight area and then the rest of the house that's from 1930. So it was a
Yeah.
really interesting project that I learned a lot.
That was a great project. We did some really cool air conditioning equipment too, really reutilizing a boiler basement. But yeah, we can't go into it. And this is really not different than it was a 1990 house, right? That was built with OSB, Tyvek, and bat insulation. I can't just go in there, do an add-on that has continuous insulation foam. The pressurization differences between the envelope we do great, and we're going to shift water vapor. So that's more prevalent in the older structures. I just walked a house on Friday. It's a Tom O'Neill design, so really prevalent Mexican modernist, and built only two houses in Houston. He died in '68, so he was very predominant from '50s through the '60s. This is a big house. In 1958, it was a 7,100 square foot house. It's
Wow.
pretty large, hanging out over Buffalo Bayou. It's only going to be the second owner. So the original owner died. She was 96 years old. The oil
Goodness.
tycoon who built it, which that we could stumble, and hit five oil tycoons. It's not that special, right? Um, but we were brought in because the new buyer is considering what they're going to do to it. And they sent us their electric usage. And last summer, so June, July, August, they're averaging $4,700 a month in the utility bills just for
Whoa.
electricity. Okay. Now, mind you, these walls are built like a Mexico City wall. They're 7.5-inch thick concrete walls. So I have thermal mass. I mean, these are like awesome walls, but they have an ancient water chilled system. And so they're like, well, our AC guy wants to come in, throw away all the water cooled system and just put in traditional splits everywhere. But he wants to throw it down the original lines. We can't open the walls up. I can't get the AC ductwork out of these. The interior walls are just like this. And mind you, they're all covered in asbestos too. So we have to be very, very conscious of touching these things. And he's like, oh, it'll be fine. I'm like, so you're telling me that we're going to take a 14-inch piece of pipe that requires 830 CFM of air, and you want to put it onto a split system that's going to throw 300 CFM down it? It's like, it's going to die in the line. You actually have no choice. We have to go back with the same tonnage. We have to go back with the same water tower. I'm not going to be able to change that efficiency, because if you do, the net performance is going to be horrendous. You are not an owner of a historic home. You're a steward of it. So if your worst case scenario is a couple $1,000s every month, that's okay, because it's better than making these changes, wrecking the resiliency factor, and losing this structure. Now, I was the only one in there talking like that, and I think the AC guy wanted to choke me out.
I bet.
But there's no architect on this, and he wants to he thinks he's going to do this remodel without a professional. And I'm like, you've got to slow down and get the right designer in here, the right architect in here to understand what our plan is, because this is not hunt and peck time.
What are some other factors that make historic or just older houses in general? Let's talk older houses in general first, and then we'll go into like some historic, quote unquote, specific items in a second. I guess on any historic or older remodel, what are the major considerations that you have to look at when you're planning these things?
That's a good question.
You're the first one there.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, what's interesting is there's good and bad to it. If it's truly an older house, like the framing material in that older house is typically going to be far better than what we can get today, like a true 2x4, not a 1.5 by 3.5, right? So there are some pros and cons to the older structures. The answers I'm going to give are things I've probably learned from Toner, which are, what is the envelope of the house? Is it a brick house? Is it a wood siding house? Understanding kind of the assembly of the walls and learning about it. Obviously I have to go in and do as-built drawings. If there's no old drawing that exists, I need to figure out the layout of the house and try to discover, does it even have air conditioning? In some cases, of course, in Houston 99.9 do, but was it added later, and therefore did they mess the house up in the process of doing that? Kind of digging into what the house was, and understanding therefore how it needs to perform moving forward. So as an architect, obviously I care about the aesthetic and the flow of the house and the spaces. But I've, as kind of Toner alluded, I have that sort of stuff running in the back of my head. If we can design it to look great, but if it doesn't function, the homeowner's going to be unhappy. And that's not going to work, right? So I'm looking at, are there single glazed windows, like you said? Or, is there any insulation in the wall? On the house that I mentioned, we actually, this sounds crazy, but we actually went back in that area and did not add insulation in the new walls that we were doing. We had the brick, so there's some thermal mass there, but we had the sheathing of sorts. We
Yeah.
had the stud wall.
We repaired the sheathing.
Yeah, and the new sheetrock that we put in. But in order to keep that house in balance, we didn't go foam it. We didn't even add bat insulation into those walls.
And that was a difficult one because this was some time ago. An energy code called out that we had to insulate this. So I sat down with the city and explained the performance criteria. And they were like, well, the energy model has to reflect that. And I'm like, well, I just explained to you why I can't insulate this wall. Well, the energy model has to reflect that you're meeting code. So I'm like, so you just want me to give you an energy model that says that? Yes. Okay. Well, I am the third party inspector. And I'm like, that insulation is not going to be there. And they're like, okay, thank you for that. They're chasing energy efficiency is not what provides you with a properly performing structure or a proper piece of architecture. There's sometimes that we have to just move through this. They were at least willing to listen to the science behind it and give us credence at inspection time. And we didn't really have any problems, but we did have to go through the extra conversations with them about that. With someone like Kevin, the homeowners, that's the first relationship they really earn is with Kevin. So he doesn't run his organization like some others do, where it's a hierarchy, right? And we have to answer to him. It is very, very collaborative. But there are times where he will have to be the ultimate influencer of the ideas that get passed to the homeowner. So, for instance, texture on sheetrock is one of those really big pieces, right? Sometimes it's easier just to take down the sheetrock than to try to sand it down and match these textures. And if the builder says that, he's going to look like, oh, he's just trying to get more scope. But if Kevin references that in his architectural design, then that will go over a lot easier, especially with older structures, because how many different textures are we going to have in that house?
Right. Well, and sheetrock thickness, any number of things is different.
Yeah, it may not be actual drywall. It could be plaster applied over
shiplap.
Shiplap, yeah.
Or I guarantee we're going to have some wallpaper underneath that texture.
Oh,
right?
yeah, like multiple layers of wallpaper. Yeah, you can peel back the layers and see the history of the house and all the fads through the years, right? If it's a 1920s, 30s house, which pretty much always had shiplap, they were balloon frame, they had shiplap on the inside wall. What are the considerations for insulating that versus not insulating it? Because if you remove that shiplap to get insulation in there, you're removing some of the structural integrity of the house. What's your take on that?
Well, if it's shiplap, I would say you could potentially, depending on if you're doing the whole house or not, right? So we're not going to throw some area out of balance. You could remove some of the shiplap and actually dump insulation down in there and put it back. You're not having to strip the entire wall. So you have some options there, I would think.
Yeah, and it's going to really come down to scope, because the first thing I'd ask whenever we had to address the envelope is how are we accessing that envelope? If you're not taking off 100% of the interior walls for accessibility, there's no sense in doing it. And we really want to insulate from, we want to improve the envelope from the outside. So I have to look at that assembly as if it's a brick assembly. Where's the drainage plane? Where does the dissipation plane sit? because we have a lot of folks who will pull off a layer of shiplap on the interior and do what's called drill and fill, right? They'll drill it out or they'll punch it out and they'll just fill it up with a lot of times cellulose, which I'll make that case right now. We don't put cellulose on walls in the South, right? That's just mold food. It's solid paper. But the back of that drainage plane may not even exist. So if I have a house almost up until about the mid 1940s, we'll start to see some masonry board, some masonite product come into play, which will be a drainage plane. We have to have a substrate to insulate against. If that doesn't exist, you can't just take a shiplap wall, blow insulation against it, because there's actually water that's going to come through. It'll get into the insulation and negate it, especially if it's paper face bat, right? Like that's a good way to get some paper wet and grow a ton of mold. So more often than not, we will look at the overall impact on energy efficiency, and there's probably better ways to lower that cost besides insulating the wall, which turns it into a ton of cost. Now, if Kevin says that we're rerunning all the wiring, well, that wall's going to be Swiss cheese anyways.
Right.
Right? Like
Well, and I've certainly learned the hard way. It's just easier to take the whole sheetrock wall down, right? Leave the studs, get that off of there, because you're going to change wiring, you're going to change plumbing potentially. Who knows what else you're going to find in there? I've worked on older homes where we've taken a wall down and the bottom plate is completely rotted out. So there are structural considerations, as you mentioned, that need to be looked at. And I advise my clients now, if we're renovating in an area, take all the sheetrock off.
Yeah.
Don't try to, pick and choose the areas. We're going to add a sconce here, so let's cut a hole. In the long run, everybody's better off if you take all the sheetrock off and start over, because it can potentially reveal current problems and or future problems.
Yeah, I won't do a whole house remodel anymore where we're leaving drywall on the walls.
There's
it's
no
just
point in it.
There's no point. And if your drywall guy is charging you $50 to $100 per patch, and you've got 20 patches in a room, it's the same cost just to hang new drywall. You can get new insulation easily, new wiring. You can see those rotted plates, termite damage that might be there that you're going to miss if it's all covered up. I mean, I'm kind of going through this on my own house. We're kind of remodeling one room at a time in my house as we can shift kids around and things like that. Whether the room needs it or not, we are taking the entire room down to the studs. And every single room, I'm finding at least one or two studs or ceiling joists that have either rot or termite damage, or electricians over the years or whoever has drilled a bunch of holes. And I'm like, you know what? Let's just strip this room down and let's redo it the right way.
I remember the first house I restored for myself on Galveston Island. We opened up one of the exterior walls and it was full of dead pigeons, tons of them. We're talking like 60 dead pigeons. So I said, stop, don't take those pigeons out. I did some research to figure out what the R value of all those pigeons were. And I had like R8 in that wall of dead pigeon carcass. It was actually pretty cool. And then I removed it, and I just wanted to know what the efficiency impact of me removing the dead pigeon carcasses from my walls would be.
This sounds like a tall tale.
It's not. I actually have videos of me pulling them out, and because I couldn't reach them, so I'd use a crowbar and reach in with the crowbar and scratch them out of the balloon framing. But that was a 1871 structure.
Wow.
So in some cases, I just cut the bottom plate and just let them drop into the crawl space. So, yeah, but there's everything, so speaking of that, when we do have access, even pulling the baseboards, it lets us get in there and suck out decades and decades of rat poop, roach poop, whatever else is in probably one of the biggest improvements we can make in the indoor air quality of an older structure is by cleaning out the wall cavities, removing the insulation, and vacuuming out all of the debris and it will fill up a truck. It is a ton of debris because all of that moisture that's dissipating through the wall is traveling through that's communicating into your space and into your airflow and into your body. It's easily, so we would tell people, I'm not insulating your walls, but I am going to improve your indoor air quality. So there's pluses and minuses from that. But what I hate to see is an insulated wall full of rat and roach poop for the last 70 years.
Well, you think about every time your air conditioner kicks on in the house and kind of pressurizes the house. It's drawing. It's finding all those little cracks and crevices in the outside walls. It's pulling the air through the walls into the house. And like you said, if there's all that rat and roach poop, it's pulling it through your electrical outlet covers, and it's just drawing that stuff into your house multiple times a day. Every time your AC comes on,
Yep.
it's a delicious thought.
It is a delicious thought.
Delicious dish.
Well, and I know Kevin has this pre-conversation with the homeowners, right? They want that big 60-inch gas cooktop in that, 1,600, 2,000 CFM hood.
2,400 CFM.
Oh my gosh. The thing is monstrous, and the amount of pressure differentiation that creates and makeup air and everything. And of course, I'm going to come around later on and say, hey, have you thought about an induction cooktop? And I'll be the one who gets burned down for it, but he'll have that pre-conversation with the homeowners.
We're in Texas. We use gas, son. Total side note here. We were at a GHBA lunch last week. Terry, that works for Toner, was sitting next to me, and Sam too. And the speaker got up there and started ranting. It was a political lobbying PAC speaker, and he was talking about lobbying the state and the government not to take away our gas ranges, and he was telling everybody how much better gas ranges were.
I was not at this meeting too.
No, but me and Terry and Sam were just kind of sitting there at the table looking at each other, like just shaking our heads. Like,
it's nothing to do with the gas itself, right? We could get into a whole electrified home, gasless structure, and get past the politics of that and talk about that for sure. And that comes into more contemporary architecture and acknowledging what that means. But I mean, so that kind of brings us into the whole. We talked about installation, but talking about windows. I mean, how do you address your windows in a historic structure? Right. When something has to be replaced. So how does that happen?
Well, I mean, sometimes it can't, right? Yeah. I mean, I've worked on a home the home itself was registered with the city. And I went to a meeting specifically to see, can we do something? And they said no, like the windows have to stay. And so then, it's like, you got to work around that the best you can. Do you reseal all the windows, rework them, seal around them, basically trying to close all those little holes you're talking about when the AC kicks on.
And what's more challenging is like in Woodland Heights, right? Where they say you can replace all the windows except for the front. One. That's worse.
That's worse.
Because now we're going to suck in all of that air through those front window assemblies. Yeah. But we can do, magnetite windows where I can seal them up from the inside with acrylic glass or things like that. You kind of touched on the process of historic councils or registrations, or can you go through what that process is like, and also what it kind of means to the cost of the project?
Yeah, it adds a little cost just due to time and research, but the experience that I had was a house on the outer edge of River Oaks near Shepherd, I think, and it had been registered previously. I don't even know if it was by the current owner, but it was on the registry. So I had to go down to one of the city council meetings and sit through a lot of other exposition and whatever. They're trying to approve other things going on. And they addressed mine pretty quickly, and it was pretty straightforward. Like, no, it's on the thing, and you're required to keep the windows, especially the front, to keep it as it is. But they were concerned. The structural inspector, who I think initially brought the issue up, wasn't there, but that's how kind of we got engaged with it. He came to inspect the house, said, you've got to keep these things. We tried to show him, we have windows that are rotting. They're currently rotting, and they've just been painted over 50 times. So of course, they don't operate. They're all painted shut. And unfortunately, the answer was simply, it doesn't matter if they're rotting.
Fix them.
Fix it. Yeah. Put it back to the way it is, whether it's good for the house or not. So it was.
And that's a hard thing, because the craft of repairing original windows is so tedious.
Yeah.
There's really only one group I know of in Houston that even does it, and they have like a 2-year wait list. And I've done this myself, and it's not fun. And it takes a lot of time, especially when you get to cypress windows, which we have a lot of. They don't, you can't modify them with anything other than old growth cypress. So buying old growth cypress is like $17 a linear foot, right? And that's before you mill it, and then the milling costs. So trying to get a mullen that's 30 inches across, that's a $150 piece of wood. So it's a bit of a challenge in finding old glass, movement glass, or mercury glass, and we have a lot of prohibition glass, which is that kind of really cool green tint. You can't just go pop another piece of glass in that; it'll look real. I mean, you can. It's going to look horrible to me or to Kevin or us, right? But that's a hard thing to do. If I could throw out there for Curtis, I know you're not busy doing other stuff, but if you can go start a window restoration company, you really help me out. Right. So
We used to have an employee years ago. We had a guy that worked for us who did a lot of those windows. We used to do those ourselves.
yeah.
Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore.
Yeah, it's just time consuming, and it'll be so unnecessary. It's so expensive. When it's all said and done, we're talking $3,000-$4,000 a window in some cases, and it's really going to make want to make a homeowner replace them. And we've seen it. We've seen people finish their jobs, and what happens a year later? All the windows get replaced because that's a repair permit, not a remodel permit,
Hmm.
and you can get away with murder on a repair permit.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. And you have competition that does it all the time.
So, I mean, I guess the main the main point of this episode, and we haven't even started to get there yet, was kind of like, what do things cost? And so cost considerations for historical remodels. It's hard to pin like, hey, it costs X dollars extra per square foot to remodel a historic home. It's just, you can't do that. But I think that before people even purchase that kind of property, before they even make an offer on that kind of house, they need to understand what they're getting into. Because I think people sometimes buy these homes not realizing how complex all of this is and what it's going to cost. And they end up backing out, selling the house, whatever. So other than like expensive to redo windows, what other, and kind of the planning process with the city, extra hours for the architect to go before the historic board, things like that. What other cost considerations are there that you guys can think of for doing a historic remodel?
Well, I think to me, the right way to do it, if you could, it's hard if you're in the process of purchasing the property, but it would be to get an architect and potentially uh, a structural engineer and ideally a contractor there before you actually say, yeah, we're going to buy this, to look at the house. Because I have been able to meet with clients and before they buy and kind of walk the house with them and let them explain to me what they want to do, because I can already know like what you're asking to do is going to be more difficult because it's a historic home or not. Um, and also look, is the brick on the outside of the house spalling? Like, is the foundation or the pier and beam situation, is it already failing? Are there considerations that a typical homeowner is not going to know to even ask? So it'd be nice if they could get a team in there prior to even buying the structure, frankly, to then preload them with that information of, it's not just as simple as, putting new cabinets in your kitchen and you have a remodeled home. It's structurally, is it sound? What is the air conditioning system in the house at all? What are the windows? Is it insulated? Is it not insulated? Does it have a crawl space? How wet is the crawl space? Like, we live in a swamp, as Toner likes to say. What's the condition of the thing now? I think that's the biggest part to me, which ultimately will lead to cost. What does it cost to fix? But I think if you can educate them and understand what the process is, but also what are their expectations on the outcome of it? Because are you going to have squeaky floors because it's an old structure? Are you going to, there are certain aspects of an older home that you just have to accept sometimes. Some people are willing to do it. Some people like the charm of that. Other people don't. And you want to match the right person with the right structure.
Yeah. I mean, I think the most custom home is a historic home because you can't buy history, right? So you can't create it, you can't make it. It only comes earned. I will say that if you're looking at an older structure, you're better off buying a historic home that's an absolute hammer bananas, everything is broken house because there's no argument. You have to replace the plumbing. Oh, you have to replace the brick. You have to do the foundation. You have to do the electrical. That's a lot easier. We just know it has to be done. The more difficult ones are what we like to call painted pigs. right? This is going to be very predominant in the heights. And it's going to be those bungalows that are super cute. A craftsman's going to be the chief example. A lot of trim work, right? I mean, it's not Victorian gingerbread. It's a little more contemporary. People really, there's a reason why craftsman style was so prevalent, right? It's just been painted over. The wood floors were redone, and but we're still sitting on top of aluminum wiring or knob and tube, cast iron, and the house is priced at a point that none of those are taken into consideration. And there's 5 other people waiting to buy the house behind you. So those are the things that are going to fail. We're going to have sewer line failure, guaranteed. Someone's going to fall through the floor with their toilet attached to it eventually. You're going to have electrical issues and a very, very high fire risk. They don't look at things like going into the attic and seeing that there's encapsulant everywhere because it's had a previous fire. It's assumed that every house will have some type of fire incident every 30 years. And what does that mean, right? Because you're going to have a chimney that's going to fail. You're going to have a water heater that's going to catch fire. It's just inevitable. I mean, Curtis uses this statement all the time. If you're not burning down a house every now and then, you're just not that busy, right? That's
That's not what I say.
but it's inevitable.
Cut
Mistakes,
that out, please.
yeah, mistakes happen in kitchens. People burn cans of beans, right? That stuff like that happens, and you have to be able to identify it. And I know we've had realtors on the podcast. A really good realtor is going to have favors, right? They're going to be able to call Kevin. They're going to be able to call me. They're going to be able to call you. And we're willing to give up an hour or 30 minutes of time to walk through and look at something and give some opinions, knowing that that might be future business down the road.
Yeah, I consider that marketing, frankly. I mean, I have that's what I have, real estate, or even contractors who have a client is looking at something. Can you go look at this with them? Just yeah, and I choose to do that free. Like if I'm going to spend an hour with somebody, I just do that, whether I get the job in the future or not. They need to be educated. I'd rather somebody know what they're getting into. No matter who does the work, and just give up that hour of time for the sake of the house, frankly, and the future owner. But yeah,
You're actually looking out for the community. You're hoping that the right person buys the house to
yeah,
begin
right,
with.
yeah,
So, especially the part of town that Kevin lives in, he's seen a lot of transition from older housing stock to pretty much mostly multi townhouses,
yeah. It's all
which
over
those are not built. Those are some of the worst built structures in all of Houston.
Oh yeah.
We can have a whole conversation about townhouses. And those, I say, those will all be ripped down within 50 years. They should be. They should be ripped down tomorrow,
Oh,
most of them.
100%.
Well,
Yeah.
mine's 15 years old,
There you go. So, we
so
can talk.
we're doing a lot of repairs to it. You can see all the stucco repair in the neighborhood. That's
Yeah.
a different conversation.
Yep. But just north of him, I think the Heights has done a good job of managing through the restoration of a lot of those historic structures. But it's actually an area that we have one of the highest rates of forensic calls on. And we don't advertise, but we are on every next door link. And last year we did well over 50 houses that were having misbehaviors in historic structures on the historic registries. And some of those are related to, well, the historic says we couldn't do this, right? Then it leads to some challenges.
We always talk about how important it is to have, the architect, the owner, the builder, performance designer, everybody kind of together on the project early and working together to achieve the best outcome. I think on historic structures, specifically remodels, 'cause, obviously all historic structure projects are remodeled, but on those projects, it's so important for everybody to really have an understanding, to come together early, to know what's going on, just to kind of collaborate together to understand what the scope's going to be, and to really dig into to the items like I keep going back to windows because it comes up all the time, to really understand. Hey, these windows have to stay. These are the performance implications. These are the cost implications for fixing the windows, rebuilding them, whatever. So, just talk briefly about kind of working together early on these projects.
I think we walked a project together recently up. I don't even know. It was very far.
Oh, that was out in Central Texas.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was like it is. It's not like it's a log cabin. It was
Oh,
probably a kit home when they built it, but it's lumber walls, and a windstorm came in and ripped a patio roof off that was not anchored down to the slab, and in the process, flooded the interior wall. So part of it is fixing that problem, and now we're going to do renovation addition work to that structure. But so I think to answer your question, you know, that's a great example where we got to walk it at the same time. We don't typically get to do that. So when I walk a project with a client, my process is to basically immediately refer them to toner. Again, even potentially before I've gotten the job, to expand their kind of understanding of what the process is and all the different components that go into it. Most projects I have are usually linked to an interior designer already, and a lot of them are already linked to a contractor already. But I want to say, here's a structural engineer you can talk to, and here's a energy consultant and or building performance specialist that you should talk to, regardless of who does the work for you in the design realm. So building the team is essentially that's how I sell projects to people too. Like build the right team. If it's me, great. If it's somebody else, great. But make sure you have people you're going to get along with who understand the problems ahead of you, who understand what you want to get out of the project. And then to me, that's how you get good outcomes, right? You have happy clients and pretty homes and good construction, and all the things kind of work out when you build the right team.
And to kind of go back to where costs, right? We're trying to drive to some costs. So I'll speak personally because I've restored 4 homes for myself that are all in the early to mid 1800s in the worst location in the United States, right? On Galveston Island. Like, let's just melt like butter every single day. Um, and I would say that, and we do a lot of historic work down there. It's a historic structure is not more expensive if you accept the fact that you're working with a historic structure. If you don't ask it to do more than it was originally designed to do, it's very, very normal pricing to a remodel. If you ask it to outperform or be designed beyond its original standards, it will be extremely expensive because you're trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole, and the net result is going to be could be catastrophic. Um, Less so the nicer the climate is, right? Like up in Central Texas, it's not quite as bad now. It will be eventually. So I would say cost wise, if you have the right team and you approach it from the beginning with the right attitude and the right acceptance, it's very normal. If you don't have the right team, if you don't have the right attitude, and you don't understand how it was originally meant to perform or architecturally meant to be, it's going to be very, very expensive for a very long time.
That's what I was going to.
Yeah.
It's going to stretch the process out
Yeah.
because you're going to encounter new problems
Mm-hmm.
along the way that nobody thought about.
Yep.
Yeah, one thing that I also wanted to mention to kind of wrap this up is, we have to make a lot of assumptions. Well, in all remodeling, there's a lot of assumptions that are made, but especially when you're talking about something that's potentially 100+ years old, you're making a lot of assumptions about how that thing was built and about kind of what the layers are that make up that house at this point in time. Until we get in there and start doing some demolition, we don't know what the last 10 contractors have done to that house, right? And so after demo, it's a great idea for the team to kind of reconvene. Okay, it's all opened up now. Toner, Kevin, let's walk this again. Make sure our assumptions are valid. Make sure that this is reality. And do we need to reassess what's going on here? Did we find something unusual? Did we find R8 worth of pigeons in the walls that are helping us a little bit?
And that's my exact appointment after this is the 1985 Mullet House. It's been demoed.
Okay.
We had to go in and finally see what our assumptions were. And I guarantee that we're going to find something new. It's Matt Sneller's job.
Yeah.
It's a Sneller job. So it's finally time for us to go in there. It's been a year and a half. We've been waiting for this. When they were removing drywall, 1/4 inch drywall was on top of plaster, right? That slowed that down. Had they known, but who would have thought? And it was where it bridged from drywall 85, plaster 1920, the 1/4 inch went right across. Now marrying that into it, we have 4 inches of plaster next to a 1/2 inch of base drywall. It's gonna be a fun transition right there.
Yeah.
right? So I mean, hopefully we could just throw a giant cased opening right there in it. But it's unfortunately it's the question today is going to be, can we do traditional line-based plaster on bridging to Venetian plaster? And I can probably tell you the answer is no, because the substrate structurally is going to be totally different. So we're gonna have that conversation. We're
Probably
gonna
have some cracking where those two come together, right?
Well, it's also where the foundation came together, and we had a 1920s, and I'm pointing to Kevin because it's a 1920 slab, right?
Oh,
to a 1985 pier and beam.
That's unusual.
Really, so and with a floating transition between the two. So we have structural engineers there today. We have plaster professionals there today. We have 2 different HVAC contractors that we're walking through, because there's no sense in me specifying something that can't be done by, or someone that's willing to do it, right? Sometimes we have to softly bring in these trades on these difficult projects, so we don't also pay an excess amount. That's a fun house. In fact, I'll try to get some pictures up on Instagram of that walk so that everyone can see it. But
I think it should be a field trip after this recording. I think we all need to head over there and do a field trip.
Yeah, we should ask the homeowner to come in and talk about costs later on. See where he is with it.
Exactly. I'm going to call Matt when we finish up and ask if I can tag along with you.
But that's the right team, right? It's a good team. It's a Danny Rigg job. Oh my gosh, it's 2 of your guests.
Yeah.
It's a Danny Rigg design.
3.
Yeah. And Matt Sneller and me, and Lee Curtis with High Performance Home. Has he been on here too?
Not yet. But he will be.
He's, does installation and HVAC in concert, which is going to be very, very important on this structure. And we've already sourced the 1985 glass block, so don't worry, we've got that. So anything that breaks, we'll make sure that we still have more glass block.
In the 1985 Miami Vice house, you might have like R8 worth of like cash hidden in the walls, like cash money hidden in the walls.
Handguns and cash inside the walls.
Well, last funny comment. So you mentioned you found the pigeons in the walls. We did a remodel where I found a large family of dead possums in the walls, and they've been there for so long. There's nothing left but bones, but they were fully intact possum skeletons. They were like stacked up inside a wall. I
so wish you had mounted that and it was in your office somewhere, and we would have the house possum.
I've got some pictures of it somewhere. I got to dig that picture out and post it. That was like pre-Instagram, that was 15 years ago, but I've got a picture somewhere. I'm going to dig it out and post it.
Well, and coming off of the project that Kevin and I walked, what was really cool was behind this log cabin was the original county school from, oh my gosh, we're talking, well, because this family bought this land. They were one of the first like 300 people in the state of Texas, and they basically acquired all Madisonville.
Yeah.
I mean, the distance from the front gate to this house, it's miles. Wow. So yeah, it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But they had this old historic school right behind it, and we walked through it and had the potbelly stove in it and everything. And we're like, what are we going to do with the school? So she does some plans for it eventually.
They want to try to reuse. I mean, they're going to take it down
and repurpose
the materials. They
want
to reuse the materials that they can reuse.
Yeah.
On the property.
It's very cool. It was such a delight, right? So I think to kind of move to a positive note, it is an absolute privilege to work on historic structures. And almost every modern building deficiency, I correct with historic building approaches. Because historic homes, especially pre-air conditioning homes, had to work in line with the climate, not against it. And we learn from those and we apply them in more simplistic and modified format for modern structures. We would not be able to do what we do and know what we know without appreciating where we came from. So every time any of us get to work on a historic structure, we are in benefit of that. So it's a privilege. Absolutely.
It's great. Well, guys, I appreciate you both being here today. Always a pleasure to have you. And it was awesome having you on for the first time.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll do this again with both of you. We'll make sure that we do. So, and thank you guys for joining us again on this episode of the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. I hope that you'll join us next time. We'll see you later.